Here we are again, gentlemen. This is Caleb Jones, and this is the Alpha Male 2.0 podcast. And once again, I am sitting in a high-rise building looking out. This time I'm looking out over the ocean. I am back home in Dubai. And right now, as I'm talking, the sun is setting. I can actually watch the sunset every night. The sunset over the ocean. Oh, it's so nice. It's so much better. God damn, my life is so much better. My life was good to begin with, but now it's so much better. And many of you, I am happy to observe, many of you are either moving out of your collapsing Western country, or you're actively planning on moving out of your Western country, or you have demonstrated great interest in moving out of your collapsing Western country. All good. Very good. What a difference a few years makes, especially coronavirus. I say, the West is collapsing. People go, oh, yeah, yeah, whatever, man. And then coronavirus comes along and it's like, oh, my God, I think the West is collapsing. Yeah, you think? So because of this, many of you are asking me questions in terms of your location-independent income and how that relates to the country in which you choose to live. For example, here's some examples of some of these questions. Well, Caleb, you talk about countries that are rising, countries that are stagnating, countries that are collapsing. But if I have location-independent income and that income comes from outside the country, do I care if the country I am living in is collapsing? Why do I even care? That's one question. Another question is, okay, if I get money from outside of the country, how is that taxed? If it's still taxed regardless of where I make the money, then what difference does it make where I live? Various other questions like that. So I'm going to address those questions and all the other types of questions in this podcast because I do realize it's a little complicated. I do realize this stuff can get complicated very quickly, and it can. There are so many different countries. There are so many different options, and location-independent income is new to a lot of you. Now, a lot of you already have this. A lot of you in my audience already have location-independent income. Good for you. Thank goodness. Well done. A lot of you don't have it yet, but are working on it. So I understand this stuff gets complicated, confusing. So thus this podcast. So a few things. First thing, does it matter where you live if 100% of your income is sourced from outside of that country? Do you care if that country is collapsing or not? Here is my answer. I don't think there's a definitive answer to that, but here is my answer. If 100% of your income is sourced outside of your country, does it matter if the economy in that country is strong or weak or stagnating or collapsing or rising? Does it even matter? Technically, no. In terms of how much money you make and the amount of income you put in your pocket, exclusive of tax issues, which we'll talk about in a second, no. In terms of that paper income, no, it doesn't matter if 100% now of that income is sourced outside the country. Where it does start to matter, outside of tax issues, which I'll cover in a second, where it does start to matter is your lifestyle. So if you live in an economically depressed country, or you live in a country that's doing okay, but is doing worse and worse every year, like the United States, Canada, Australia, Western Europe, lots of Eastern Europe, and so on, and that bothers you, if it bugs you, then yes, it does matter and you shouldn't live there. Now, some guys, and I've talked about this before, some guys are perfectly happy living in a third world country or a second world country. They're perfectly happy with that. Matter of fact, some guys actually enjoy living in those countries versus more high-tech, infrastructure-based first world countries like I do in Dubai. And that's fine. So if you don't care, sure, you could live in Africa. I was just talking to a guy last week who has location-independent income, 100%. He lives in, let's see, where does he live? Oh, I've already forgotten. Not Nigeria. I want to say Botswana. I think it's Botswana. He lives in Africa. White guy, white Western guy, and he loves it there. He thinks it's great. And his American dollars and European euros go a long way where he lives. So he's living the life. But he doesn't mind living in a third world country. He thinks it's fun. Great. If that's the kind of guy you are, great. That is fine. One of my favorite countries in the world is Paraguay. And that is not quite a third world country, although it's borderline, maybe a second world country. And given certain parameters, I could live there. I don't, for other reasons. but I could live there. That's fine. I do prefer big cities, but that's fine. So it depends on your lifestyle. So that's not an income question. That is a lifestyle question. If you honestly don't care about the negatives of the economy where you currently live, if that doesn't bother you and or you enjoy it, then fine, stay there. Matter of fact, there are some guys I've talked to in the pickup artist world who will purposely live in countries that they consider kind of fucked up and collapsing because they think, rightly or wrongly, sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, it really depends, that it's easier to get laid in those countries. Now, these are not alpha male 2.0s, these are pickup artists. So these guys don't make a lot of money, but their objective, or at least their priority, is getting laid rather than income. But you see my point. So given that, it doesn't matter. Now let's talk about one aspect that does matter in terms of where you live, even if 100% of that income is not sourced where you live, and that is taxes. Matter of fact, that should be one of the prime decision-making factors where you move as an alpha male 2.0. It certainly was for me. Now, I realize that taxes is a much bigger issue for me than most guys in my audience. I make more money than most guys in my audience. Philosophically, I'm a minarchist libertarian, so on a philosophical level, I have a bigger problem with taxes philosophically than maybe other people in my audience, especially if you lean more left. And I understand that, and that's fine. But it should still be a consideration in terms of where you live. That's why you've got hard left-wing Hollywood types like James Cameron, who is a huge left-winger, who has done things like set up land and farms in places like New Zealand in order to reduce his American taxes. So even big left-wingers who make a lot of money are doing things to save money on taxes on an international basis. What you have to consider is how your location-independent income is taxed. So as a very easy example, if you live in Australia, for example, and you stay in Australia on a regular basis, even if it's less than 6 months, they can and likely will decide to tax you on your worldwide income, even if 100% of that income is not sourced from Australia. Is it fair? No, it's totally fucking insane. But they can get away with it because the Australians put up with it, just like Americans put up with their bullshit tax laws. This is the reason why I didn't move to Australia when I was strongly considering moving to Australia several years ago. The attorneys there and some reps in the government told me very clearly, and they should be precedent for this, that even if I stayed in Australia less than 6 months a year, either right at 6 months a year or even less, even if it was a month a year, I could potentially run the risk, not potentially, I ran the risk of potentially getting taxed on my worldwide income for the entire year. And Australia tax rates are quite horrible, 40% plus. Now, the one saving grace to that as an American is that there are tax treaties, and you should research this when you look at a country. There are tax treaties between the United States and Australia, meaning that if I spent, let's say, 6 months in the United States and 6 months in Australia, Australia would tax my worldwide income the 6 months I was in Australia. They would not double tax me for the taxes I already paid in the 6 months I spent in the United States because they have a tax treaty. So it wouldn't be double taxed, but I would still be taxed at 40+%, which of course ruins my number one reason of leaving the United States in the first place. So you've got to be aware of how the country that you're looking at taxes foreign sourced income. Very, very important. Just because you don't make money in that country doesn't mean they can't tax you. And I'll be honest with you, most Western collapsing countries, Australia, New Zealand, United States, Canada, Europe, most of Europe, particularly Western Europe, will tax your ass on income you don't make in their countries. Now, why do they do that? It's very simple. They can get away with it. Those are all the countries that people think are the best. All the countries where there are white people who speak predominantly English, those are all the countries that people want to go to, even if they're still collapsing. People haven't caught on to this yet. And these countries know that, so they can be total assholes, and their citizens will allow that abuse. That's just how the way that goes. On the flip side, you've got territorial tax countries like Paraguay is another example. And Paraguay is not the only example. A lot of South American countries, a lot of Caribbean countries, a lot of Southeast Asian countries, various countries all over the world, certainly African countries, will only tax you on money you earn inside their borders. So if I moved to Paraguay, I would not be taxed on my location-independent income outside of Paraguay. I would only be taxed on income I made inside of Paraguay. Now, with many countries, including Paraguay, it's not literally that cut and dried. It's a little more complicated. Sometimes they can tax you external income, but after X number of years, like after 5 years or 10 years, they call that a tax holiday. Every country is different, so you have to research these things before you make a final decision of where to move. You should know exactly how that is taxed. Does it tax worldwide income? Does it only tax territorial income? Another question, and this would be an example in terms of countries like New Zealand, when does it tax your worldwide income? So New Zealand, unlike Australia, the way New Zealand works is that if you stay in New Zealand less than 182 days a year, then they will not tax your worldwide income. They won't do it. They will tax other bits and pieces perhaps, but they won't tax your worldwide income. But if you spend more than 182 days and in the case of New Zealand, during any contiguous 12-month period, this is not calendar year, this is any contiguous 12-month period, if you stay 183, 184, 185 days, in other words, more than 6 months, then boom, they will tax your entire worldwide income for the entire year, even if you're there for 6 months and 1 week. And again, if there's a tax treaty with your current country, they won't double tax you, but you'll still be taxed. Now, I should throw this out there. There are some alpha male 2.0s or aspiring alpha male 2.0s who don't give a shit about taxes. They just don't care. As long as they make the $75,000 annual income and it's location dependent, they're like, Caleb, this tax is just not a big concern for me. I'll pay the tax. I really don't care. I want to live here. And if they have high taxes, I'll put up with it. I don't mind. If you're in that category, that's fine. And frankly, the less money you make, the less of an issue it is for you. That's true. And by the way, if you're following all other alpha male 2.0 lifestyle structures in terms of how you structure your business, how you structure your finances, you're going to reduce your taxes a lot anyway. Even when I lived in the United States, my overall tax rate was a tiny fraction of the typical Americans. It was around anywhere from 7% to about 18%. You compare that to the typical American who's paying 50 to 70%, that's pretty damn good. In my opinion, again, because I'm an extremist on this issue, 18% is still way too much. My goal for my 5 flags, and this is the goal I've always had since day one, is to reduce my overall tax burden to less than 4% of my total income. As I've mentioned before, I am a libertarian minarchist. I am not an anarchist. I am not opposed to the concept of paying taxes. I think you taxing me 1, 2, 3, 4%, maybe even 5% to pay for basic services like roads and cops and an army that protects the borders. I think that is a perfectly valid thing. I have no problem with that. If you want to take 40% of my income, 30% of my income, half of my income, 70% of my income, you can go fuck yourself. Thank you very much. No, thank you. I don't work for you. You're the government. You're supposed to work for me. At least you're supposed to. Now, we're talking in a fantasy world here. There is very few governments in the world that work for the people. Matter of fact, there probably isn't any at this point. But you get my point. So another question I've gotten is, hey, Caleb, if you're talking about a place like Southeast Asia that is rising, and that is correct, Southeast Asia is the only region in the world that will be rising economically consistently for the next 25 to 30 years. All other regions will be either stagnating or collapsing. So if you move to a place like that, what difference does it make if you have alpha male 2.0 income that is sourced from outside of those countries? For example, let's say you're going to move to Vietnam, which is a fantastic, fantastic growth country. If that is the case, these guys ask, would I then want to pursue business inside of Vietnam as an alpha 2.0 if it's location dependent income? And if I did pursue that income inside of Vietnam, would I not be then violating alpha 2.0 lifestyle structures? Because then I'd be location dependent, right? Okay, several answers to that question. Number one, it is a really good idea to have some foreign sourced income. It would make, this is my opinion, this is not Alpha 2.0, this is just Caleb's opinion. It would make me very nervous to have 100% or even 90% of my income sourced only inside the country in which I lived, even if I loved the country in which I lived. It could be Dubai, it could be Hong Kong, Singapore, these countries that I love. And if I lived there, and I do live in Dubai, I don't think I would want 100% of my income or even the vast majority of my income to be sourced from inside Dubai, even though Dubai has zero taxes. So I'd be very happy with the tax scenario, but long-term, in terms of long-term income stability and redundancy and protection for myself, I don't want to rely on any one country. That is a tenet of Alpha Male 2.0. We don't rely on any one woman for our sex lives. We don't rely on any one business for our income. We don't rely on any one country for our livelihood. That's just not a good idea, especially now where a good part of the planet is collapsing and just about the entire planet has embraced some sort of either a quasi-authoritarianism or socialism. Not a good idea to have any one country completely dominate your income and completely dominate your financial life. So if you were to move to Vietnam, for example, Yes, you certainly can have income inside of Vietnam and still be an Alpha 2.0 and still have location-dependent income. I'll cover that in a second. But I still think you should have some income sourced from outside of Vietnam. I have mentioned my goal. This is not Alpha 2.0. Again, this is just Caleb's opinion and Caleb's personal goals. One of my big financial goals, actually was a business goal, is to have 60% of my total income from all of my income streams and all of my companies to be sourced from outside of the collapsing trifecta. That would be America, Canada, and Europe. So I only want America, Canada, and Europe to comprise a total of 40% at most of my total income. The other 60% I want coming from other places. Places on the rise, like Asia, places like that. But even places not on the rise, like South America, maybe Africa, the Middle East, or at least some parts of the Middle East. Now that I live in the Middle East, I've realized how much money is here. My goodness. Hell yeah. Places like India. So that's fine. Places like China, whatever. Even places like Russia. Cool with me, as long as I'm not reliant on any one country. So that's the first piece of the answer. The second piece to that answer is you could live in Vietnam and have a business that sells to the Vietnamese people, but still be location independent. So let's say you had an online business in Vietnam, you lived in Vietnam, you had an online business that had websites in Vietnamese or English, but geared specifically toward Vietnamese people who live in Vietnam, and you sold products online, products or services or information, doesn't really matter, to Vietnamese people. You would still be location independent, even though you'd be relying upon the Vietnamese market. So you would live in Vietnam, but you could live anywhere you wanted in Vietnam. You wouldn't have to live in Ho Chi Minh City. You could go to the beach. You could live anywhere you wanted within Vietnam, and you'd still have income coming in because you'd be location independent. Also, you could pick up and leave Vietnam and be gone for as long as you wanted. You could, if you come from the UK and you want to visit your family for Christmas, and it's not locked down because of COVID hysteria, you could hop on a plane if you live in Vietnam and spend the entire month of December and the entire month of January back home in the UK, and you'd still be making money from your Vietnamese customers. So just because you make money inside the country where you live doesn't mean you're location dependent, right? I mean, a lot of my income comes to the United States. I live in the United States. So fine, cool with me. The one thing I had to worry about when I was living in the United States was that there are state income tax issues. And so, for example, if I lived in Washington State when I lived in the United States, and Washington State has no income tax, that's why I live there, but it does have a sales tax. So if I sold something to anyone else in any of my companies who lived in Washington State, I was legally required to gather up fucking, sales tax of 8% and add 8% onto my bill and then send it off to the state. And so for that reason, I made sure I had no consulting clients or real customers inside the state of Washington because I didn't want to fuck with that sales tax stuff. So again, you need to know what the tax structure is where you live so you can be aware of these things. So let me give you an example of some Alpha Male 2.0s I know, international guys like me, and how they've structured their lifestyles regarding all these issues. So what some guys do is that they will, this is the classic example, I've known of this example for years. The classic example is the location independent entrepreneur who moves to somewhere like Thailand, which is cheap. It used to be really cheap. It's not quite as cheap as it was before, especially in Bangkok. But there are still places in Thailand that are very cheap. So Chiang Mai or something like that, or on the beach in Thailand where it's reasonably cheap outside of Bangkok. They would live there where things were really cheap. And their niche were very expensive, either individuals, high net worth, high income individuals, or big fancy companies based in very expensive cities like Los Angeles, like New York, like London, like Sydney, like Tokyo in some cases. So they would target these very expensive cities, totally niche into those cities, only sell stuff to people in those cities who were accustomed to paying very high prices. I mean, my goodness, if you live in downtown Manhattan and you hire a business consultant, hell, man, get ready to pay a lot of fucking money. So if that business consultant is smart, he lives in Thailand where his money is 5x, 6x, in some cases 8x more valuable in Thailand in terms of American dollars than it would be in the United States. And he's getting paid high prices because he's focused on customers who are paying high prices in their high price city. He is living like a king. He has very few customers. He barely works. He has very low work hours, and he does very well financially. That's a classic Alpha 2.0. Really, really smart. When I first heard of that, it was like 20 years ago. I'm like, God, that's genius. Because I heard of two different guys who lived in Thailand, but had clients in Los Angeles and New York. And they purposely went after these high expensive cities. Genius. I mean, how much smarter is that than the guy who lives in one of those goddamn cities? Like guys who live in London right now, I don't get it. I don't know why you'd live in London. It's so expensive and you don't get in terms of lifestyle what you paid for in London. Jesus Christ. And I'm not saying I don't like London. London is one of my favorite cities in the world to visit, not to live. I'd never live there. I'd shoot myself in the face if I'd live there and pay those taxes and those costs of living. Same thing with living in California. Same thing with living downtown New York. Really cool places to visit, not to live. Fuck that. Another example, and this is another classic example, is the guy who is really into banging foreign women and getting laid a lot. So he has location-independent income that's reasonably low, some cases lower than the Alpha 2.0 minimum of $75,000 a year. And he lives in places like Medellin, Colombia, or in cheap areas in Brazil, or places like that, places that are economically depressed, where he can still live pretty well, even on low income, and he can get laid left and right. Unlike places like Thailand. I mean, you can get laid in Thailand. I'm not saying you can't get laid in Thailand. Of course you can. But Thailand's more of a hooker culture. We're talking here like South America, where it's less of a hooker culture and more of a hookup culture and things like that. And so they take advantage of that. And yes, they have to live in second world or third world countries. But as I said earlier, these are the guys who either don't mind or kind of like that. Or in some cases, these are guys who are doing a roosh and they don't like third world or second world countries, but they're so desperate to get laid, they think they quote unquote can't get laid in their Western countries, so they move to these countries. I have my own personal opinions about that. I think it is very, very bad for your self-esteem to think that you have to travel to another country in order to get laid. I just don't think that's a good idea. If you're a total extreme pussy beta male and you're just getting started, I have jokingly recommended that guys can go to the Philippines and get laid if you're a beta. Fine, but that would be step one in a long process. I would not recommend that guy spend the next 5, 10, 15 years in the Philippines or places like Philippines because he can, quote, only get laid in the Philippines. He can't get laid in the United States or Europe or Australia or wherever the hell he lives, where he thinks incorrectly, where it's impossible to have sex with hot women. So anyway, but there are guys who do that, and technically that's fine. If that's what you want to do, that's great. Another variation on the theme that I have seen some older guys do is these are guys who have two homes. And so one home would be in a more expensive city like Tokyo or Hong Kong. And the second home is in a cheaper country like South America, Southeast Asia, what have you. And so what they do is they spend several months a year in the expensive city doing business. Then they take really long ass vacations in their second home in their cheap country. Or they work remotely as best they can, things like that. People like consultants. I know one attorney who does this. I haven't talked to him in a long time. Where maybe you spend 4 or 5, 6 months out of the year in the expensive city. You got an apartment there and it costs a lot of money and you just put up with it. You make a lot of money by servicing those clients and customers there. And then you pop on over to your place in wherever, Cambodia or Chile or wherever, where it's much cheaper to live, and you live the rest of the year there. And then you jump back to your expensive city. You just do this over and over again. I've seen guys do that. Is that location dependent? It's a variation on location dependence. You could argue it is, you could argue it isn't. It's probably a gray area, but that can work, especially if you like both of those locations. And I have said before that my objective is to have 3 homes in different parts of the world long-term. And I spend X number of months in each home and I kind of rotate between the 3 because I like cities and I like living in the country. I want aspects of both. So when I want to be in a city mood, I can hang out in my cool city, Dubai. And when I'm in a country mode, I can go get a place, a big, nice, fancy, foofy house out in the middle of nowhere somewhere and just chill out there. And then I'll probably want a third house, like it's maybe in a suburban zone or something like that. I haven't really decided on the third place. So that's fine. That works too. However you want to play this is perfectly fine. Now, what I just described is a little more expensive. You don't have to aim that high if you don't want to, but you can. Now, let me give you one lifestyle model, international lifestyle model in terms of income and things like that I don't recommend. I don't think this is a good idea. And I've seen several people do this. Matter of fact, I have a brother who lived like this for many years. And that is the model where maybe you know guys like this. Maybe you've seen guys do this, or maybe you have done this, where you go to an expensive city, okay, like San Francisco, and you get a job. You get a bullshit corporate job. And maybe if it's like, Simi Valley or something, it's a high-end job. So you're making, $80,000 a year, $150,000 a year, maybe $200,000 a year. It's a higher end job in your super expensive city, San Francisco, LA, London, New York, Sydney, Australia, any of these expensive cities, and you just have a job and you work there for like 2 years. And while you work at this job, you live like a pauper. You rent a cheap, shitty, horrible little tiny apartment. Maybe you got a roommate, even if you're older. And once you take out the massive amount of money you'll be paying in taxes, you take the rest of that money and you just sock it away into a savings account somewhere, or under your mattress or in a safe or something. You just sock it away, sock it away, sock it away. You do that for a year or two. And finally, after a year or two, you got several $1,000s, a big hunk of money. And then you quit your job, you grab your money, and you travel the world, and you don't work for a year. You just travel the world, going to less expensive countries, either in one particular country you like, or be kind of a nomad for a while and hit different countries, and you don't have to work. And you live like that for like a year or two, sometimes 2 years, sometimes the outside 2.5. And you just spend this money, and eventually you spend it all and you run out of money. So then you go, God damn it. So you go right back to your expensive city and do it again. You work for a year or two, save your money, then take a year or two off. So you like work for a year or two, then take a year or two off. Work for a year or two, then take a year off. That is not Alpha 2.0 for many, many reasons. Number one, you're not location independent because you're locked into these expensive cities to earn an income. Number two, you are not free because you have to be a goddamn wage slave. You have to have a job. Having a job is not Alpha 2.0. And I still get to this day guys saying, well, I have a job. Can a guy with a job be an Alpha 2.0? No, you can't. I'm sorry, there's no way around this. You can't. You can be a beta male who loves his job. Sure. You can be a corporate slave who doesn't hate your job. Sure. But you can't be an Alpha 2.0. Alpha male 2.0 means you are free to do whatever you want any day you want. When I wake up every day, I literally choose to do whatever I want whenever I want. I don't have a boss who forces me to be at a certain location or do certain things or meet certain deadlines. I just don't have that. I can do whatever I want. So you can't do that if you have a job, even if you say you have job 50% of the time. No, you can't do this. And so the question then arises, well, could I do this with my own business? Could I build an Alpha 2.0 business, work it really hard for 2 years, sock away a bunch of cash, and then do nothing for 2 years, and then start all over again? The answer is no, because you can't turn a business off and on like you can a job. With rare exception, you just can't do that. Matter of fact, I have seen guys who have done that and burned themselves because they built up a business, then they decided to take a year off to gaze at their stomachs, and then they come back after a year and they've lost all the customers, they've lost all the credibility, they've lost all the word of mouth, they lost all the momentum, and it took them years to get the income back up to where they had when they quit their job. A classic guy who did this, those of you who are older and have been consuming self-help content for a long time, if you know the name Dennis Waitley. Dennis Waitley was like a self-help guru in the 90s. Pretty big name guy, cool guy. And he did this. He took like 2 years off to meditate or some shit. And when he came back, it wiped out his business and no one ever heard from him ever since, even though he tried to come back. He eliminated all that momentum. So no, you can't do that with a business. You're going to have to do it with a job, which means you're not Alpha 2.0. Plus the lifestyle of saving up a bunch of money, then burning through all your savings and having no savings, and then you got to go back to work. That is the opposite of financial stability. That is the opposite of freedom. I think that is a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. These guys who do this for a long period of time, they end up in their 40s or 50s with no money. They have no money invested, no money saved, because they've spent their whole lives spending all their savings. Stupid. So no, that is not a lifestyle model I recommend. What I would recommend you do if you really want to take a lot of time off is you set an objective to build your Alpha 2.0 business and take a lot of time off. Again, one of the Alpha 2.0 business requirements is that it doesn't take more than 30 hours a week to maintain. Mine takes less than 30 hours a week if I chose to do it, and I don't. So you can just develop a lifestyle where you have a business, you work the business regularly, but you can regularly take a week off, 2 weeks off, or every week you can take 3-4 days off. Perfectly fine. And I personally know men with not only 6-figure incomes, but 7-figure incomes who only work 4 days a week. So I know it can be done. It's pretty damn nice. Do something like that. Much better and much more safe and much more sustainable and much more free than the guy that blows his savings every, 2 years or something like that. This is a very big topic, and I have much more to say about this. And we actually have a course coming on how to move out of your country, which I technically haven't announced yet, but that is coming very shortly. So I have a lot more information and content on Five Flags stuff coming very, very soon. I will see you very shortly. Have fun.